Hi there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the self-titled album from Danielle Bradbery, her debut album. So, okay, let's try this again. Back when I reviewed Cassadee Pope's long-delayed debut album, Frame by Frame, I made the point that I didn't really watch NBC's The Voice, half because I don't have a TV and half because I've never really cared at all. To me, it was just yet another reality show with an overcomplicated competition narrative between a selection of big-name stars using their proteges to win over their colleagues. The question I don't think anybody was adequately prepared to answer was how on earth The Voice would actually manage to help the careers of the new acts that they were trying to promote. Well, it did pretty much exactly what its predecessor, American Idol, did. Set the artist up with a selection of professional songwriters, and then proceeded to scrub out every single iota of distinctive personality just to create more blandly written pablum for the masses and public at large, which was arguably my biggest problem with Frame by Frame. Look, that album was not bad, despite all the hatred I got in the comments, as much as it was just kind of boring, and a big step down in terms of personality from her days with Hey Monday, which at least had something of a distinctive sound and some actual soul in comparison to the neutered pop country that she's pursuing now that just has no personality. But you know what? At least on that album, Cassadee Pope had some songwriting credits, which ultimately led to the few songs on that album that I actually kind of liked. With our newcomer, Danielle Bradbery, the winner from Season 4 of The Voice, we've got no such luck, and thus I had a real sinking feeling when I prepared myself to look at her self-titled debut album from Big Machine Records. I mentally set myself up for yet another Taylor Swift wannabe looking to cash in on that brand, especially considering this girl is 17 years old, and every iota of her public persona seems to be groomed to emphasize her cute factor. So, what did I find? Well, a better album than I was expecting. Yeah, you know what? I'm as surprised as anybody, but the self-titled debut album from Danielle Bradbery is a bit better than I was expecting, and you know what? It's actually pretty good. No, I've not taken lead of my senses, and while it's not great, for a debut album coming from a reality show act, it's about as good as you could expect, considering that the label was likely breathing down her neck to make sure that she made something that was at least vaguely sellable. And while she definitely did that to the expense of some experimentation, there are a few tracks on this album that show signs that Danielle Bradbery could be a really promising act in the future for country music. So yeah, I've got high hopes for the girl. So let's start with talking about Danielle Bradbery herself. And I can say without hesitation that it's no surprise whatsoever that her songs did so well on the charts when they were released to iTunes, because this girl has a beautiful voice and a lot of charismatic presence. There are some vocal affectations that are somewhat reminiscent of Taylor Swift, I realize that, but there are a few moments where she comes across as a little bit more downbeat, with a little bit more honest maturity than you'd typically expect from a girl her age. Plus, she's got great pipes, and when the production truly gives her room to just go for broke on this album, she definitely delivers. A little bit pitchy at points, to be sure, but you know what? That goes away with some experience, so you know what? I'll give it to her here. And really, when her production and instrumentation are this on point, they complement Bradbery's voice quite well. At its absolute best, the plucky instrumentation and broad selection of guitar tones adds a lot of personality to her delivery, and I can even hear traces of accordion, fiddles, and banjo, which all do a solid job complementing her voice, never being too broad or heavy to overwhelm her, plus adding a lot of distinctive country or even folk flavor to the album. And you know what? I have to single out the guitar work on this record. The wide selection of guitar tones and the fantastic texture, not to mention some pretty solid solos, lends this album a shocking amount of character, to the point where the guitar work is easily the highlight of a couple of the blander tracks on this album. And while there are points where modern pop country tropes do rear their heads, some questionable production that lowers Bradbery's powerful voice in favor of some rougher guitars that don't quite fit as well in the mix, a few traces of backbeats that just don't work as well with the organic instrumentation, and a selection of backup singers that, look, they just do nothing for the mix overall. They sound kind of chintzy. For the most part, this album stays really quite close to its country roots, and that was a big plus for me. And you know what? Here's the other shocking part. The songwriting isn't half bad either. Yeah, there are definitely moments of some lyrical clumsiness, and the cliched nature of some of the love songs and how saccharinely sweet they are can get a little exasperating. But you know what? Danielle Bradbery is still a teenager, and songs of innocent young love, they do fit her delivery. But it's where the songwriting tries a little bit harder that this album truly stands out and shines, particularly on the two best tracks of the album, Heart of Dixie and especially Wild Boy. Now, the former is an escape song that has a surprising amount of maturity and texture that, I'll admit, feels a little bit awkward sung by Bradbery, might be better fit for a singer like Brandy Clark, but you know what, she does deliver it well. And Wild Boy is easily the album's standout track for me, as it's smart enough to capture both the romantic appeal of chasing the bad boy, but also with enough wisdom to realize that he's not the one to be tamed, or whether or not he can be tamed, or with one with which to fall in love with. Even though that particular song wasn't written by Bradbery, her delivery just does enough to imply that, you know what, maybe we should all give teenage girls more credit. So, okay, if I've got all of this praise for this album, where does it go wrong? Well, unfortunately, pretty much exactly as I expected it would, as it runs into the same problems that all debut albums from reality show contestants run into. See, here's the thing. For these records to sell well and not alienate the audience, maintain the audience that they had from television, the labels will often keep the songs as bland and inoffensive as possible, nothing that could potentially scare off a buyer. So, you know what that means? That means pop production, less texture in the instrumentation, and underwritten empowerment anthem lyrics that just give the singers plenty of chances to belt and not really say all that much that we haven't already heard before. And while it doesn't really make the songs bad, it can definitely make them tedious, and that's what happens in some of the blander tracks on this album. And yet, Danielle Bradbery, she does manage to sidestep most of this, and I think I know why. As a singer, she already comes across as pretty sweet and pretty innocent. And thus she seems to have gotten away with instrumentation that has a little bit more country flavor to it. Let's face it, none of the tracks in this album are going to offend anybody. But then again, that also could have been a marketing decision by her label. Considering how much Taylor Swift is trending towards a pop direction with her next album, Big Machine might have a need to replace her on country radio. And you know what? Danielle Bradbery wouldn't really be a bad candidate. And in the process, they somehow managed to add enough flavor to make a pretty solid country album, all things considered. So call it success by accident then. So in short, you know what? I actually kind of like the self-titled album from Danielle Bradbery, mostly because it knows exactly what it is and it keeps a firm handle on its tighter scope. It's an upbeat pop country album that's all sweetness and smiles, let's be fair here, but by sticking to that template, it took the time to add flavor and variety to the edges without going off in weird tangential directions or experimenting all that hard. It's nothing that's gonna blow your mind, to be sure, but it's a lot more of a cohesive work than Cassidy Pope's Frame by Frame, and with the standout Wild Boy, it showed some good songwriting chops with the people that Danielle Bradbery was working with, and it showed some great delivery from the singer herself. You know what? I'm gonna give this album a 7 out of 10 and a recommendation. And while it might just be a little bit too saccharine for some listeners, it's an album with stronger hooks and more texture than you usually see in modern pop country, and it's never actually bad. You know what? I enjoyed this album, so check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. Until then, see you next time.